All right, this class is going to talk about IP addressing. We're going to talk about public and private addressing, as well as classful and classless IP addressing. In IP addressing, there's basically two different methods of doing it. You had classful, which is no longer used, but it does set up a good foundation for how we're doing it today, as well as classless, which is what's commonly used in Internet Protocol version 4, which is our major addressing scheme of today. The IP address was 32 bits in length, and with that, with those 32 bits, they were divided into 4 octets of 8 bits. Each one would give us information. Starting at the beginning, the leading bit there, class A is a bit, any address that starts with a 0 is the first bit. Class B would start 10. Class C would start 11, 0. There were some other classes used, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But basically, if you, in the early 90s, if you wanted an address, you would request either an A, B, or C address scheme. Now, the A was for the largest entities, such as the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense would request a Class A, and they would have millions of addresses to be able to give out. A medium-sized entities such as the University of Maryland might request a Class B space, and they would have around 65,000 addresses to use. And then a smaller entity such as a bank, an enterprise, might request a Class C, and they would have 256 addresses available. Now, these classes were immutable. You could not add Class Cs together to make more space. If you ran out of Class C space, you would have to request a more expensive Class B address. Now, humans have a hard time recognizing ones and zeros and making sense out of them, so we use dotted decimal notation. With that, these octets are changed into decimal numbers, which would be 0 to 255 in each octet. And the classes are identified. We can more easily see them identified as the first octet. In the first octet, if it's a 0 to 127, it's going to be a Class A network. Class B would be 128 to 191. A Class C would be 192 to 223. And then the Class D and Class E that aren't used would be up from there. For example, you can readily see that this IP address that I put on here, 128.8.74.1, would fall into the range of a Class B network because it falls within that range of addresses. And we would identify that in the old days as a Class B address. So we would know it'd be part of a large organization. And when a network engineer was deciding the growth and everything, they would request the size of space they need. And it was more expensive. The Class C would probably be hundreds of dollars a month. The Class D would be thousands of dollars. And then the Class A space would be millions of dollars. Okay. After classful addressing, we went to classless addressing. Due to the growth of the internet, no one expected when they started classful addressing the internet to grow as fast as it did. But there was a flood of networks being requested, and they saw that they would soon run out of Class B space. Every college wanted one, every major organization wanted one, every manufacturer that didn't want to spend the money for a Class A was buying Class C or renting Class C networks and being assigned those. So in order to get rid of this, we went to classless IP addressing, also called CIDR addressing or subnetting. We use classless interdomain routing, which is CIDR. And that helps divide up the networks and saves those Class B spaces, because now using classless, you could have a Class C network and supernet it and use more spaces and more addresses than the 256 normally allowed. It's also called slash notation because it's represented as a slash and then some number. For example, 192.168.1.0/24 is the same as the default gateway, or 255, 255, 255, 0. And if that was represented as a binary number, it would look like a bunch of ones followed by zeros. But that slash, if you counted the ones that are contiguous, there would be 24 ones there in a row. So that's how slash notation works. So when we have that, when we see /24, we can do the calculation and determine how many addresses we have available. because there's 32 bits in the space and we're using 24 of them for the network address, that leaves us with 8 bits, or 2 to the power of 8 addresses, and 2 to the power of 8 is 256. Now, if we wanted to subdivide that network and use 2 networks from the space we were given, we would just borrow one from that last octet, which would make it, our gateway mask would be 255, 255, 128, but it would be easier to notate it in CIDR notation as a /25. We borrowed 1 more bit. So that means we have 7 bits left for the host addresses, and that would be a total of 128 per subnet. Right? Now, the public versus private addresses. Since we're no longer using those classes, we still think of those, and that's why I said it provided a good foundation. Public addresses are any address that can be routed over the internet. Only those addresses that are public can go through a router on the internet, through your ISP. If you put your intranet address, like the 192.168 address, it couldn't be routed anywhere except within your own network. It's also called the external address, and you normally get that signed by your ISP, your internet service provider, who's gotten it from the Internet Agency Naming Authority. Private addresses are those that can't go over the internet. They're used within your network. They can be of any of those classes we talked about. You might have a small network of only 15 or 20, but you may want to assign a private address of 10 dot something, or maybe use a Class B address. That's perfectly fine within your local intranet. A Class A private address is any number that starts with 10. That's the easiest way to remember. Anything that starts with 10 is a private address and will not be routed over the internet. Class B addresses are 172.16 through 172.31. We can use those private addresses to build our networks. Again, they're not going to be routed over the internet, so it's only going to be looked at internally. And then Class C, anything that's 192.168 is a Class C private addresses, and that's the one we use most frequently. It's probably the one assigned with your home router. That gets assigned to you, and that's what you would use. You can use any number, any series of numbers within that, as long as it matches up to your CIDR notation or your subnet mask. Right? And in summary, we talked about classful addressing, how that we used to use it. It was the foundation that was started in the 90s. We talked about classless addressing, which was in use today in IPv4 and now in IPv6. We talked about public addresses, those that get routed over the internet. And we've talked about private addresses, which you use on your internal network. Thank you.